"Out of my way, boy," Mr. Hardwick grunted, pushing aside the ragged, begging orphan as he walked to his carriage. It was Christmas Eve, and the ground was covered with thick snow. There was a cold wind blowing, and Mr. Hardwick did not want to be outdoors any longer than was necessary. He didn't care about the shoeless boy, or the fact that the child had no home to return to. His only concern was for his own family, and getting back to their warm house and the hot drinks that awaited them. The gentleman immediately forgot all about the child who'd asked him to spare a penny. But his daughter Cecily felt guilty. She reached into her pocket and found a coin, one of many that she had, and turned round to give it to the boy. But she was surprised to find that he was nowhere in sight. Only a moment had passed. Where could he have gone? She looked around, confused, but he had vanished. Her father quickly bustled her into their carriage, keen to get out of the cold. As they drove off, Cecily's attention turned to what her mother was saying, and didn't notice the alley that they went past. If she had, she might have discovered what had happened to Tom. That was the boy's name, by the way. There was a tall, thin man standing over another urchin. The man was dressed like a gentleman, wearing a top hat and holding a walking cane with a shiny silver handle. But if you looked closely, you'd see that his clothes were shabby and coming apart at the seams, as though he had been wearing them for many, many years. The man Dawkins was enticing the boy with stories of food and warmth, if only he followed him home. There will be turkey and roast potatoes, cakes and puddings, hot chocolate, and everything else you could wish for, all in front of a roaring fire. If you come with me now, I can give you all of these lovely things. The boy Simon didn't need to be asked twice. He gratefully followed the man to a carriage containing other boys of a similar age, including Tom. Simon filled the last space in the carriage, and Dawkins instructed the driver to take them home. The building they arrived at looked nothing like a comfortable house. Instead, it was a large black factory covered in smog. Dawkins forced the boys into the smoky darkness and down a flight of stairs. The room they entered was a large warehouse, lined with long tables, all with young boys standing at them, working away at making a whole variety of toys. There were wooden horses, kites, stuffed bears, and princess dolls in sparkly pink dresses. Tom looked at them with his eyes wide. He'd only ever seen things like these in shop windows. He'd never touched one before. He looked again at the boys who were making the toys. They had looked like young boys at first glance, but when he looked closer, he could see that some of them didn't look quite right. Some of them were turning green, and they had pointy ears. Some were fully green, and their eyes bulged out of their bald heads as they worked, unblinkingly. The boys were turning into goblins. Dawkins laughed as he saw the realization dawn on the new boys' faces. "Yes," he said. "You will work here and make toys for the spoiled brats whose parents care enough about them to buy them useless junk every Christmas to make up for not spending any time with them the rest of the year. You boys don't have to worry about that. No one will miss you." He cackled again, pushing the boys to their places at the worktops. Tom exchanged a glance with Simon. This wasn't what they were promised. But what could they do? Even if they could escape, it would be back into the cold, dark night. Here at least was a roof over their heads. Tom started working on making the princess dolls, being taught by the half-goblin next to him. Any attempt at conversation out with the lesson was silenced by one of Dawkins' men, who stood over each table. As he worked, Tom slowly felt the energy drain from his body. By the time he'd finished the third doll, he noticed that the skin on his hand was turning green, and then he felt his ears, and they too had started to change. The more he worked, the more he felt his body morph into that of a grotesque elf, but not the happy kind that worked for Santa. He could feel his life force drain away as he performed his mundane task throughout the night. By the time morning came, there would be nothing left of him. Cecily woke up on Christmas morning to find a whole pile of presents for her under the twinkling tree. She opened the one closest to her first, and was delighted to find a beautiful princess doll in a sparkly pink dress. She gave no thought to who might have made the toy. She just cared about how pretty it was, and that she might sit it next to her at the dinner table later, when they had their turkey and roast potatoes, cakes and puddings, and hot chocolate.